Hi, I'm Edith with Edith's Quilt Shop. We're going to make a patchwork quilt today. The simple patchwork quilt is a 9-patch or a checkerboard, depending on the layout of the fabric. Here is the step-by-step guide. To achieve a scrappy spring look seen in the image, you'll want a variety of 10 to 15 different colors in sorbet tones, pastels. The best thing to use are tiny florals, dots, and ginghams because larger prints get lost in the smaller square sizes. You need to pre-wash all of your fabric so that you don't have any color loss in the fabric when you put the quilt together. Most of the time it's because corals will fade and the reds will fade into the whites. You don't want it going from white to pink or a lighter coral color. The quilt is cut into 5-inch squares. You can use a charm pack in order to get that so that you don't have to have additional cutting, a whole lot of additional cutting. You're going to need a rotary cutter and a self-healing mat and a acrylic ruler. Cutting has to be precise. Any square that is off even 1/8 of an inch will cause your quilt corners not to line up later when you put it all together. So you want to make sure that those squares are exactly 5 inches or whatever your pattern is going to be if you're using 2-inch squares or whatever. Then you're going to dry fit it all together, and this is done with the design board or laying it on a large bed on the floor. I used to use my king size beds. Now I use a design board. And you lay out the squares onto the design board in whatever order you want. Step away from it. You can see if that's the pattern you want and the colors are appropriate. Then you can sew from that. If you need to change the colors, then rearrange the squares so that you don't have all the yellows and all the greens and all the pinks all in one place, that they're scattered throughout the whole quilt. It's also suggested that you take a black and white photo with your phone because then you can see the lights and the dark, where all the lights and the darks are, and make sure that they're all scattered amongst the whole quilt and not just all put together. Then when you get ready to sew it, you're going to do a chain piecing. So what you do is you pick up the first 2 squares of row 1, sew those together. Don't cut the thread. Pick up the second row, the first 2 squares of the second row, and sew those right behind it. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to have a piece of chain stitch between each row so that they're all sewed together. Once you complete the first 2 blocks, then you're going to add the third block on each row. Still not cutting any of the thread. You're going to have it so that basically it's going to be sewed together with the chain holding each row in place. So you're not having to go back and go, wait, is this row 1 or row 2 or row 3 or whatever? Once you complete all the rows, then you go back and you cut the chain on each row. At that point, you're going to either have to label the rows or lay them out so that you know what row is what row. Then you're going to press all the seams. In row 1, you want to press them all to the right. In row 2, you want to press them all to the left so that they will nest when you start sewing the rows together. You won't have so much thickness trying to sew through all those seams together. Once you have sewn all of the rows together, before you sew the rows, though, I suggest that you pin the intersection of each one of them to make sure that the rows line up and the seams line up and that the fabric stays nested either to the left or to the right, because you want them to fit like a puzzle piece. Then sew it all together. Once you have the whole quilt put together, then you can do what is called a meandering stitch. On your regular sewing machine, you can you have to drop the feed dogs on your sewing machine. Use a darning presser foot, and then just wiggle the quilt. Just curve it, make it curvy all over. You try not to cross any of the lines. You can either try to go down the quilt or across the quilt, or if you're really brave, you can start in the corner and go in a diagonal. Um, and just try to not cross any of the lines and make sure that it's all done by the time you get to the bottom of it. This makes it so that it looks like crinkled texture and hides many of the imperfections in your piecing, so that you don't have to worry about the piecing not being perfect. Um, then after you have completed doing that, you would place a binding of some sort. You can use double fold bias tape. If you have a binding tool maker, you can make a binding tool. Use a binding tool and just use a piece of gingham fabric and make your own binding and put it on, or whatever you're comfortable with doing. Then you're going to when you get finished, you're going to sew to the front of the quilt the mitered corners. You're going to miter each corner and to the back of the quilt. And once you're finished with that, then your quilt is done. You can put it on the bed, give it to someone as a gift, use it as a lap quilt in the living room when you're watching television, whatever your easiest would like. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.